Welcome students. This is a continuation of the previous class. So in this class I will try to round off I will be rounding off the introduction towards absurd drama and finally connecting it to Pinter, so that in the next class we will directly begin with topics that are in direct context to the play, that is. So I will just sum up what I had taught you in the last class, that is. So in the last class we were talking about you know what is absurd drama. I gave you examples from quoted examples from UNESCO, quoted examples from Sartre's Nausea. So if you can just go back to the previous class, that will be very helpful. So I also spoke about how the politics behind naming the absurd drama, what is the commitment of the artist. So we will find that I was talking about how what Sartre was talking about commitment among artists. So I was referring to Sartre's What is Literature, specifically an essay called Why Write. So you can go through them, or you can even ask your seniors if you want for a gist of what he has written, because I have taught it to them. So that will be very helpful for you all. So he talks about commitment of the artist, and I said that he's uncommitted. The absurd dramatist is uncommitted politically because he's engaged in a more subjective occupation, right? He tells the audience what he perceives the world as. So that is why the absurd dramatist finds himself without any support groups or labels or slogans or any kind of rebellious attitude. It is more or less a very bland showcasing of the love life as it is. And that is why, with all the rage and the anger of the angry young men, Beckett's Waiting for Godot had a greater impact than the very popular play of the time, that is Look Back in Anger. And even Pinter was not politically committed, as I had mentioned in the previous class, as that he does not want his theater to be reduced to the commercial incentives, that is, because he says that this is not fair on the characters, and he does not like didactic or moralistic theater. And that is why what it suggests is that there is more to this kind of drama than just the concept of absurd. However, we must just quickly analyze the description, the concept behind this phraseology, this phrase of absurd drama. So let us see what Martin Esslin says about, because he's the one who propounded this phrase, that is, he did various revisions on it. However, he maintained a singular idea behind it. So according to him, absurd drama did what a well-made play did. Well-made play. Absurd drama did exactly what these kind of plays did, but without any plot. In plots in absurd dramas are usually quite static. Example being Beckett's Waiting for Godot, or even Pinter's plays. Nothing much happens, quote unquote. There is some sort of a missing action, more than action that is present in the play. There is more in an absurd play, that is, what we notice is a absence of action rather than presence of action. So a well-made play such as Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, this is considered to be a well-made play, and it brought about, in its own kind, it brought about a revolution in the theater. It brought an intellectual projection on the stage. So the well-made plays were usually well structured and well defined. There was a neatness among the characters. It brought about the intellectual, it projected the message of what was to be said through the play in an intellectual manner. So that is why it was not much more, it was not reachable to a wider audience. So the absurd drama, what it did was, according to Martin Esslin, it shared the philosophical and artistic premises with the well made play. However, without the action, what an absurd play does was, it unfolded a poetic image. It presented a poetic image to the audience. And this image was much more important than the structure or the plot of the play. So the image projected by Waiting for Godot or Krapp's Tape or Pinter's The Homecoming or even Birthday Party, it was much more important than the absence of action or the apparent missing plot of the play. And this image, even though it lacked clarity, according to Martin Esslin, but it strongly represented the loss of clear set of beliefs, and thereby doing away with the well-made play's structure. If there is nothing to believe in this world, then what structure do we cling on to? And how does an artist present a missing structure? He presents a holistic image through the play, which does not have, even though it does not have a concrete plot, a cause and effect in itself, that is, but it strongly represents the absence of a belief system. Man finds himself faced with a frightening and illogical universe in which the means of communication, language, is also suspect. It is also, we are to doubt the communicated message. We are to doubt the language which the characters adhere to. We are to doubt the logic that is presented by the characters, because there is no belief system, and that is what the artist tries to project through the absurd drama. And even though the absurd dramatist or the well-made play or the structured play, it shared the similar political and philosophical premise or the foundation. It tried to project a similar thing, the absence of a belief system. That is, if you go through the summary of Ibsen's A Doll's House, you will be able to associate better how Ibsen revolted to the the breaking down of traditional conventional belief systems, and thereby opening doors to various interpretations, but in a much more structured and channelized fashion, so that it does not attract too much of criticism. It does not attract too much of anxiety among the audience. However, playwrights like Beckett and Pinter, they did exactly that. They wanted to glean out the anxiety from the audience, like Aristotle's the cathartic effect in case of fear and redemption. That is, here it is the anxiety which is to be brought out or gleaned out of the audience, and that is which is inherently present within the play. Like the Brechtian technique of actually showing and telling what the director wants to show through projections, through audio directions, etc., by using various props. And as I was saying that, so even though they share a similar political and philosophical premises, the way of portrayal was starkly different. The way of portrayal was not through tears or through regret, but through laughter and absurdity and utter confusion. And this was what is to be accepted by the audience, that this is the state of affairs right now. So why not see it on the stage as well, the microcosm of the absurd world in which we live in. And that is why when Tennessee Williams's work called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, I'm sure you have heard the name, came out, it began with the preface. In the preface, it was Tennessee Williams writes that we are all of us sentenced to solitary confinement inside of our own skins. This is how the preface, this is what is written in the preface of the work, and that is what also ensues, the drama ensues with this message. The entire drama, we see characters in a single evening inside of a room, and we find them coming out of their own skins, like it says in the preface, and they discuss the various problems which they have hitherto blocked inside or locked inside of their own hearts. If you go through the summary of this play, you will understand what I am saying. So that is what the purpose of the absurd drama also was, that it projected the drama in a way that it wanted to criticize as well. It had an absurd foundation behind it, or an absurd idea that emerged at the end of the absurd play, because the world in which it was being enacted was exactly that. It was illogical, it was pointless, and it was absurd. So that is the purpose behind the phraseology that is correctly put. So it is not absurd. Absurdism is not a view of life. It is not a philosophy which, a Godot or a Pinter or an Ionesco for that matter, they are trying to propagate. They are not trying to propagate, or they are not trying to create a narrative, a new narrative about absurdity. What they are trying to do is that they are using it as a technique. It is a technique and not the value which they are putting over their work. It is the technique that they are using in order to project what they feel is the current state of affairs, in order to answer to the past events or the history which has not changed even after so many events that demanded certain substantial changes. So this was the technique that they were using, and it was not a philosophy that they were propagating. It was not that a Pinter wanted everybody to believe that communication is impossible. It is not that a Godot wanted people to think that nothing happens in life. It is not that. It is the technique which is absurdism, which is absurdity, which they are using to project upon their stage. They are using it as a theatrical technique. And we can also safely say that this is absurd drama is nothing new. That it is not anything new that a Beckett or a Pinter has provided us with. As I had mentioned in the previous classes, we have example of an absurd drama, the form. We have an example of the form already present in the late 19th century, even before the revolution in the British theatre began, with the well-made play from Ibsen, with John Osborne, with the Angry Theatre, with T.S. Eliot, or with Godot, or with Beckett, Pinter, Ionesco, all of these people, all of these artists. So it was there before them, and it was even before them. There was, we know about all Brecht. You can go through So what has happened is that the ways of presenting, the ways of representation of this technique, how this technique is to be utilized and moderated, that has differed according to different artists. So we have Ubu Roy in 1896, a kind of theatre of cruelty and a conjunction of theatre of cruelty and absurd drama. We have Bertolt Brecht's Ball, that is, it came out in 1918. So in it we had a scene in which two characters, they have gambled with cards, for their souls, and they wander upon the stage and they decide that it is a they all of a sudden they decide that it is a good place to urinate, and they do so. They do urinate upon the stage, each asking for approval for the indecency. So various kinds of representing methods, that is, we have T.S. Eliot's contribution, unfinished contribution to it, that is Sweeney Agonistus. So whether we call all of these plays, whether we formulate these plays into various kinds of categories, whether we call them absurd, surreal, whether we call it Dadaism, of what is happening in the theatre, it is all of it tries to project, it is all of a piece, that is, it is all belongs to a similar concept. And only recently has the absurd drama become much more commercial, and in this sense the ideas behind it, or correctly speaking the techniques that this kind of theatre uses, they are corresponding, or they do correspond now to with a wider audience, with more number of people than it was before. And it is not that we are talking about the absurd drama in a fashion that it presents or projects or propagates for or asks for, that is lack of logic. It is not that, but it tries to it tries to present the madness of logic behind it. It is more the non-logic of things rather than the illogical. I'm sorry. Rather than the illogical. Yes. So the madness of logic, the logic that an absurd drama follows, has madness ingrained within it, and that is not something that we should categorize as a lack of logic. Very much like Hamlet, it is not that there was utter and relentless madness, but there was certain method in his madness. It was a technique that Hamlet was using in order to retain, in order to gain his objective, whatever be that. You know what his objective was. So, and a critic called Kenneth Tynan. So he writes, or he says, that is, he opines about the absurd drama. Remember what I was talking about, Sartre, and how he talks about the commitment of the artist, and how I said that the absurd drama is politically uncommitted. However, we remove that uncommitted from our sentence, and we say that he is committed in another fashion. So Tynan puts it like this, that once having espoused the illogical, the irrelevant, the surreal, he, or the absurd dramatist, is committed. A single lapse into logic, relevance, or reality, and he is undone. So this is what he writes in a book called it's a collected book. I'm sorry. It's It's Pinter on theater. Okay, so he says that once having adopted this method of the illogical, the irrelevant, the surreal, because these are the things that these are the way which, according to the absurd dramatist, the world is working upon. The world is running on these things, or on the foundation of these things. So the absurd dramatist, once having adopted the technique of the illogical, the irrelevant, and the surreal, he is committed. He is committed at once when he adopts this technique, because we have to understand that what commitment of the artist, wherein he tries to transform the world through writing, according to Sartre, that is, that he tries to give us a holistic presentation of the world as he puts it. And when the reader or the audience watches or reads this artist's work, he or she is pushed with a similar energy, with a similar affective energy, to act upon that presentation, to bring about certain changes, to look into the silences of the author, what the author is not saying, deliberately keeping keeping mum about it. So and pushing certain, instigating the reader or the audience to find out the silences, to find out the gaps, and to work upon it. So that is what the commitment of the writer or the author is, according to Sartre. And in this case, the commitment of the absurd dramatist is to thoroughly adopt and use this absurdity as a technique, as a lens through which the drama is to be seen by the audience. It is a lens that the absurdist provides us, that we are the audience, we are to see the drama through this lens of absurdity, and come to a holistic comprehension, come to a holistic understanding, come to a final agreement with the artist that yes, the world is much more illogical and irrelevant than it is logical and relevant. And Pinter says that if even once he lapses into logic or relevance, he is undone. The absurd dramatist loses his or her purpose, loses his or her commitment. If he or she tries to use another technique to project the world through the theater, he is undone, because the need of the hour, what the current philosophical situation of the society, of the world in which we are living, the philosophy of the current world is absurdity. Because if it were not so, I'm just quoting something that I came across the newspaper today. It's a quote that I came across, and I will quote it on the screen, write it on the screen. That it's so hard to forget pain, but it's even harder to remember sweetness. We have no scar to show for happiness. We learn so little from peace. This technique of absurdity is an answer to this. The fact that we have learned nothing from peace, and the fact that we again and again dive into chaos. And because we have nothing to show for peace, it is true. It is a very honest made statement. And that is why the need of the hour, the society that we live in, it has delved into this absurdity. The fact that we constantly move towards war, that we constantly move towards inhumanity, that we constantly move towards rude behavior towards other people. We constantly move away from all of that which has been taught to us through the conventional means, through the conventional structures of the society, like religion, like law, like ethics. We are our lives, we are led in the opposite direction, in the antithesis of all of these principles, of all of these knowledges, of all the knowledges that are generated from these structures. And what is made of us then at the very end is we are absurd subjects, and we are just spending our time on this earth until our very pointless and irrelevant lives come to an end, and even then we do not learn anything from it. So that is why when the dramatist lapses into logic and relevance, the dramatist or the artist loses his or her commitment, and he or she is no longer a committed artist. And so this kind of relentless logic, that is the illogic behind absurdity, it is very much evident in Pirandello. I think that you have heard of his name. And Pirandello was a huge influence of and one of the forerunners of Beckett and Pinter. In one of his work, I'm just giving you an example, called The Rules of the Game. A wife is estranged, separated from her husband, and tries to make it seem that she has been indecently approached by a young man, that is, who is a brilliant duelist. She hopes that her husband, in fulfilling his conventional obligations, because if there is a duel, there has to be a duel. If there is a husband, if a wife is approached by another man, in the traditional Victorian custom, there used to be a duel. So this wife, who imagines that this concept still, she's already estranged from her husband, but she still absurdly imagines that is the state of affair, and she believes that in this duel the husband will die and this young man will live. So to her surprise, what happens is that her husband not only accepts the challenge, but what he does is that he names the lover, he names that young person as his second. That is, he nominates that young person to fight in his place. Okay? But on the appointed day, he simply stays on bed. He does not move. The husband does not move at all. He has issued a challenge because he is her husband. But her lover, as the real husband, has to fight the duel and is killed. Here, the husband logically applies the rule of the game. So this is completely absurd, and we can see how this similar illogical concept behind everything has trickled down, in a starker and cruder manner, in Beckett and in Pinter. And it is true, we can say that real life, it is not so much absurd. We can truthfully say that it is not so much absurd as it is a game that can be evil, that can be sinister, harmful, savage, cruel, pathetic, or it can be compassionate, or it can be comic. So this is the absurd theater merges the comic and the tragic, and this is the way it kind of teases and troubles the audience while making it laugh. So that is the biggest achievement that absurd dramatists or absurd plays have reached, that it teases us, it troubles us, through laughter, which is one of the biggest resistive forces that human beings are allowed, even though we do not realize it as much. Laughter is much more of a dangerous weapon than anger or fear. You laugh at the face of power, and power will at once recognize you as a dissident, you as someone who negates power's values, more than anger, more than fear. So this is what the absurd drama essentially does. It tries to titillate, it tries to tease, and trouble the audience rather than hammering the truth into them, rather than giving them a huge, and a big indigestible message, rather than presenting them with blood or murders. It presents the audience with comedy, and it teases and troubles the audience, because when truth is laughed at, because what the theater is presenting is nothing less than truth. So when truth is laughed at, what are you to believe in? What are we to believe in real life as well? This is a question that we must ask ourselves. In the today's world, all the more relevant, that if we laugh at truth, truth is laughable nowadays. What is truth is actually laughable today. So if we can laugh at truth, then what we must ask ourselves is that what are we believing in? What are the belief systems that we do really have inside of our hearts, inside of our minds? Do we really have any belief system at all? That is what we must ask ourselves. Coming back to Pinter then. Pinter's only avowed influence was Beckett, something that I have mentioned before. And he writes, I will quote it, he writes that just a moment. He says, there is no question that Beckett is a writer who I admire very much. If Beckett's influence shows in my work, that's all right with me. You don't write in a vacuum. You are bound to absorb and digest other writing, and I admire Beckett's work so much that something of its texture might appear in my own. This he says in a work called, it's not a work especially, just a moment. He says this in you will be able to find it in, that is, a collection of interviews called New Comment, which came out in 1963. Harold Pinter Replies. This is the name of the article. And here in this New Comment, it came in BBC also, and he said that Pinter was discussing his relationship with Beckett and describing his first contact with him, reading the novel What. What is a novel by, it is a novel by Beckett, and they were discussing about it. So that is where he talks about Beckett. That is where he confesses about his influence, about the influence that he has had from Beckett, that is. So they are so even though they are not exactly, it's not that they are a mirror image of each other, or that their works are mirror images of each other. That is not the case. However, as Martin Esslin writes in one of his article called Godot and His Children, Esslin sees the plays, that is plays of both of these writers, sees them as plays that have abandoned, completely abandoned a beginning or an end. Is completely abandoned a beginning, middle, and end structures, and they are both remarkable for their use of dialogue, which he says is constantly exposed as an abortive attempt at communication. So even the language of Pinter's works, even the language of Beckett's work, they seem to point out to the fact that language is in reality insufficient or inefficient, or it does not have any efficacy when it comes to real communication. And in today's modern world, in the postmodern world, that is all the more true, that even though we do have language as a means of communication, we call ourselves alienated, we call ourselves, lonesome, isolated. That very fact proves that language is somehow, not somehow, for very many reasons, discussion of which is not possible right now, for very many philosophical reasons, political reasons. So language is inefficient, it is not as efficacious, it is not as effective when it comes to communicating among people. So that is what Beckett's and Pinter's plays, they tell us about. But it also reminds us about Charlie Chaplin, the Age of the Silent movie of Laurel and Hardy. So this is of course based upon the existential thought, where Beckett's, especially in Beckett's work, where we are constantly being pushed or nudged towards thinking about the phrase, towards thinking about this phrase, that I am myself. This is quite a problematic statement. It is a philosophical statement, of course. So I am myself. This is a problematic because the self is not constructed in isolation. The self consciousness, that is my consciousness, the subjective consciousness, is relational. It is related to objects around me. It is related to other subjects around me, those selves which are not me. So the self does not exist in isolation. Its consciousness is all of this. Even in its subconsciousness is located the culture of the society, the history of the society, the geography of the society. That also determines our subconscious, that also determines our culture. So the geography, the geopolitics, that is emotions, emotional capability, all of these things, politics also, all of these things, they are related to the subconscious. That is how we are made. We are not, our consciousness is not made in a day. Our parents teach us from the very first day about how to be, to wear clothes, to call this person that, to call that person this. These are the names, these are the letters, these are the colors. So if I am to imagine that there is a parallel world where all of these does not exist, so how does communication take place? How is the self constructed in that universe, in that parallel universe? So that is not a question for our concern, but in this universe we are brought up, according to Lyotard or the postmodernist theory. We are fed stories from from childhood, and those stories, they make our subconsciousness. So a child with a gendered father is more likely to grow up into a sadist or into a masochist, rather than someone who is sensitive, rather than someone who is sensible, for that matter. So our subconsciousness, our consciousness, they do not exist in itself, but in these absurd dramas, in these absurd plays, this idea is constantly pushed, that I am myself, which is the problem, which is actually the problem that the dramatists are trying to project, that the dramatists are trying to present in front of the audience, that in this postmodern or this modern world, in this age of individualism, in this age of high subjectivity, in this age of personality, ego, arrogance, pride, in this age of greed, relentless and endless greed, in this age where there are no end to wants, where the necessities are neglected, where a few where many die in order to save the few. So in this age, this is what we think, that it is only myself that I am to be concerned about. There is no regard, there is no sensitivity, there is no empathy, there is no emotional reflexes, there are no compassion among human beings. And if all of these things do not exist, then what is the need for language? And therefore all communication does break down in this existential world. That is why Mr. Bean, when he drops down on this earth from where we do not know, he's utterly confused. For him, this world is absolutely absurd. He does not understand the ways of this world. And that is what a Beckett, that is what a Pinter, as a sensitive person, as a sensitive soul, as all artists are, that is how they must feel. That the world is trying to pursue this idea that I am myself, but this is a problem, and therefore it creates a lack. Therefore we have a dehumanized subject such as Pozzo Waiting for Godot. That is why in Endgame we have Beckett's characters, they all live in dustbins. That is why in Pinter's plays we find the presence, we find an all-encompassing presence and pervasive presence of a malcontent, of a malevolence in nature itself. That the characters are constantly thwarted from their positive objectives, from their positive actions. They are seized from creating relationships. They are seized from constructing a truth. And therefore being thrust into this phrase again, that I am myself. So, like I was saying, there is a relentless pursuing of the meaning of this phrase, I am myself. And like Beckett, Martin Esslin says this in Godot and His Children. So I'm just saying it out loud. He's saying that, like Beckett, Pinter wants to communicate the mystery, the problematical nature of man's situation in the world. However natural his dialogue, however naturalistic some of his situations may superficially appear, Pinter's plays are also basically images, almost allegories of the human condition. So what appears is not the case. There is something malevolent lurking underneath that will thwart, that will obstruct, that will create an obstacle for the characters to humanize themselves, and they will inevitably be thrusted into the illogic of things, into the absurd world that the reality is also about. But the most clear distinction between these two writers is that where Beckett came out with all of his guns, and he used abstract concepts in order to project the abstract values according which we believe in the real world. What Pinter did was that Pinter injected a lot of realistic atmosphere into his plays. He created an atmosphere which was very much next door, and yet it was absurd. Pinter presented us with an atmosphere, with a play that was very much, that when we see it, we feel like it is something that is happening right next door, thereby attracting the audience more, thereby reaching or penetrating the minds of the audience more, and maybe disturbing the audience more, because in the garb of this realism, underneath this facade of everything is okay, what he presents is that the malevolent nature of human beings, malevolent nature itself, nature which has been made malevolent by none other than human beings, represented by the characters in the play. So very much like Kafka, or if you have read William Golding, if you have read Lord of the Flies. So as in the novels of Franz Kafka or William Golding, the normal world, the normal and the ordinary world of human beings, of human relationships, they can quickly and suddenly become very sinister and even violent. So look at what another critic describes Pinter's works as. So this is a book or a work Dark Comedies by J.L. Stein. So he writes about about Pinter, that is just a moment. Let me adjust this into the screen. Yes. So this is what he says. He says that his audience, that is Pinter's audience, is made to feel through an exquisite friction of nightmare and normality the earthly human need for security, recognition, and acceptance. But society, by forcing us to conform, can destroy the very security we seek from it. So you can reflect upon these lines for a few minutes, and it's very clear to understand. So it is by the very means of socializing us or putting us into structures and categories and designations and worth and merit and this and that, it is destroying the very security, it is destroying the very social fabric from which we seek security, underneath we want to be sheltered, that is. So that is what J.L. Stein talks about Pinter's plays. And Pinter's plays are, they are generally held together, by this dominant idea as well. He himself attests to his his adherence to existentialism. He writes and he talks about the impossibility of verifying the past, because we cannot really go back into time and verify whether or not these things have actually happened, and therefore the dangers of communication and the impossibility, he accepts to these things. He writes of the impossibility of verifying the past, the dangers of communication, and the impossibility of a final or definitive statement. And therefore he says, I will quote it on the screen, just a moment. Sorry. He says that no statement I make, therefore, this is Pinter's words, he says that no statement I make, therefore, should be interpreted as final and definitive, because he believes that there is nothing final and definitive. There is always room and scope and want and need for change. And so he says that even what I say should not be interpreted as final and definitive. One or two of them may sound final and definitive, but I won't regard them as such tomorrow, and I wouldn't like you to do so today. So very well put. Whatever he is trying to do through his plays, this is what he basically tries to do with his plays and through his plays as well. Of course, we can put all of these into criticism if we say that, then is there nothing to look forward to in this world? Is there nothing good in this world? Is there nothing positive in this world? It's true, we can put this criticism in front of the absurd dramatists of this genre, of the absurd play, of the absurd theater, that is. That what about the scientific advances? What about the technological advances? What about the social changing steps that we have really taken, which has really brought positive changes, permanent changes into this world? But we we cannot ask for artists, we cannot ask for dramatists particularly, because dramatists, as I said in the very beginning of the class, in the very first classes, that a drama has to be, in order to exist, a drama has to be performed in front of the audience, and which requires the audience to pay up. Otherwise there is no drama, otherwise there is no theater. So it is a live it's something that needs to happen in order to be. So dramatists particularly, they cannot adhere to a singular idea. They cannot adhere to either a pessimistic point of view or to an optimistic point of view. They cannot go on confronting neither the bomb nor the stars, but they have to confront a world in which both exists, the stars and the bomb. Pinter is concerned with humanity, love, necessity, and also contingency, and also the fact that we really do not know what is about to happen in the very next moment. That is why he says that there is no means of verifying the past. So he does all of these things, he talks about necessity, he talks about love, humanity, and contingency, the dangers of life, not in an idyllic landscape, not under the light of the moon or the stars, but in a slum, but in a room, but under the stairs, but in an attic, in the next door. He does not, however, fall into the trap of explaining everything in terms of poor environment. So it is not that it's only the environment that we are to look at, interpret. That is his stress or his push on the impoverished backgrounds in the early plays. It's self-relative, and it underscores, it underlines the fact that all material assets has fundamental paucity, that is paucity, that is all materialistic aspects, they are bound to shrink in value. So even if you have like 1,000 different sets of sofas inside of your house, the value or the essence is not attached to the quantity of the kinds of the number of material things that you possess. And that is why his stress during his early years of career, his stress upon this impoverished background, this is what it projected, that all material assets, they have a certain kind of paucity. They are diminishing in nature. They will not make you grow in value. They themselves will not grow in value, like morality would, like ethics would, humanity would. So he neither wanted to show these ideas through a didactic or a moralistic play, nor did he want to provide us with something which is completely abstract, something which is very dreamy, something which is impossible to accept in the real life. So what he presented us with was stark and hard truth. The effect of his plays is not simply of pessimism. They are not always negative. As Robert Bolt, I hope you have all heard of the name of this poet, or primarily a poet. Robert Bolt writes, This is a statement. This statement is given by Robert Bolt in Plays and Players. It's an interview, list of anthology of interviews. One of them is Robert Bolt's, and he says that I find, as in the plays of Pinter, two things being said which are not absurd. I find, for example, in Waiting for Godot, a kind of bitterness and pain and resentment expressed by this play and by these characters about the absurdity of life, which seems to postulate that some reasonable expectation has not been met. Otherwise, why the bitterness? Why the pain? Why the protest? Again, beautifully put. This is the reason behind this absurdity, that there is a fundamental lack. Otherwise, why do we feel so much of pain? Why do we feel isolated? Why do we feel lonely in a crowd? A very common statement made by people. So why do we feel this heaviness in the heart? Why do we feel that we are constantly running towards something that we really do not want? So if there are so many questions, what Pinter and Godot do is they're trying to explore the various ways in which these questions can be asked, the various dimensions of these questions. Pinter's plays are a commentary on that reasonable expectation and observation on its lack of fulfillment, which Robert Bolt talks about. They are suggestive of some, even though they are minimal, they're suggestive of hope, even if it is minimal. For him, the plays are their own justification, and hope for the system in which they exist is suggested because they do exist. And this is what he says. I will end the class with this. This is what Pinter himself says. This is what he says. It's a collection of interviews again. Writing for myself. So look at what he says. He says that no, I am not committed as a writer in the usual sense of the term, either religiously or politically. And I am not conscious of any particular social function. I write because I want to write. I don't see any placards on myself, and I don't carry any banners. Ultimately, I distrust any definitive labels. As far as the state of the theatre is concerned, I'm as conscious as anyone else of the flaws of procedure, of taste, of the general setup in management, and I think things will go on more or less as they are for some considerable time. But it seems to me that there has been a certain development in one channel or another in the past 3 years. The caretaker wouldn't have been put on and certainly wouldn't have run. The Caretaker is the name of one of his plays, before 1957. The old categories of comedy and tragedy and farce are irrelevant, and the fact that managers seem to have realized that is one of the favorable changes. But writing for the stage is the most difficult thing of all, whatever the system. I find it more difficult the more I think about it. So he does not, this is what he tries to do in his work as well. The fact that he does not see any description upon himself, no placards on himself. He does not believe in any particular social function. That is what his plays are all about. But the fact that he has seen a fundamental acceptance of change, that is the minimal hope that he also tries to present in his plays. So with this, I will bring this class to an end, and in the next class, please be ready with a copy of the text. We will begin with the text. I will not read the text with you all. That will not be possible, but I will make random quotations from the text. I will make random selections from the text to explain the holistic philosophy, the construction behind it. So what I request you all is that you have a copy of the text in front of you present for the next class. If you have any questions about this class, about today, this lesson, please do record them, write them down. You can just you can ask me in the next class, or you can ask me anytime that you see fit, even if it is outside of the class. But ask if you have any questions, any doubts, if you want to put an opinion, if you want to make a suggestion, if you want to say anything, or something about the play or whatever I am teaching you. If you want to understand something, please come up and I will definitely try to help you. Thank you very much. Bye bye.